Hi, everybody. So this is, I think, the fifth in a series of conversations I'm having with people about platform design, platform thinking, to some extent, platform engineering ideas. Seems like an interesting conversation to be having right now. Lots of people trying to figure it out. And today we're lucky enough to have my friend Charles Betz here to talk with us about it. Charles, do you want to introduce yourself to everybody?
Yes, thanks for having me, Jabe. I am currently the research director for enterprise architecture at Forrester Research. We are a research firm. We look at broad trends in management and IT and digital management in my area specifically. Do a lot of case studies, have a lot of conversations, and do significant survey work as well.
Cool. So I would imagine inside of enterprise architecture, and I know from some of your other work and some of our other conversations that we have we share some opinions on what a platform is, and we
Mhm.
are contentious occasionally about it, which is great.
Great.
What for this conversation? How should we view a platform? What should we define it as?
Well, we've been actually thinking a lot about this because at Forrester there's a couple of operational definitions,
Yep.
and I think I'll start at kind of the highest level, the most abstract. You look at something like the work of Simone Cicero with the Platform Design Toolkit.
Yep.
Now there
I'm
he's
talking to
talking.
him tomorrow.
Oh,
Anyway, keep going.
awesome! Tell Simone I said hi. So there we're talking about some very large scale kinds of sets of principles,
Mhm.
that would help us build collaborating ecosystems, using, some fairly novel financial models, maybe not that novel because, there's this focus on entrepreneurship and
Yep.
micro businesses, and that's actually not a new conversation, although it's coming back lately.
Yep.
And then at Forrester, we've also had the concept of platforms. If you think about very large grained offerings, large grained contexts,
Mhm.
like Amazon, not AWS, but just look at the Amazon
Mhm.
retail
Yep.
platform. Let's say I have a small business selling stuff, or Etsy as a platform.
Mm.
These are platforms for small businesses to come in and obviously use the benefits of this platform. They can use certain aspects like supply chain management and logistics and inventory and all that,
Mm.
publicity, marketing. It just comes part of the platform.
Yep.
And then you get into some of the more internal kinds of things like extremely large, highly scaled ERP solutions, what we now call DOP, Digital Operations Platform.
Okay. Yep.
My colleague and friend Elizabeth Herbert covered that for Forrester. And as much as people would like the ERP world to kind of just go away and fade into the background, it's 60-80 billion dollars. It
Yep.
ain't going away. It is a thing and will remain a thing.
Yep.
These are huge bits of infrastructure.
Absolutely. Yep.
um, and then we have the more recent, and I'm going to appoint to team topologies. Full disclosure, I was a developmental reviewer with Matt and Manuel on it. My
Mhm.
name's in the book. But regardless of that, or maybe in spite of that,
Mm.
the book has had some influence.
Yeah.
know,
Absolutely. Yep.
we it seems to be getting a lot of traction lately.
Yep.
And one of the outcomes, and I don't know, I'm on my to-do list to sync up with Matt and Manuel. I don't know what
Mm.
they think about this, but one of the outcomes of team topologies has been an allowance also for finer grained platforms,
Yeah.
in particular platforms that start to grow out of the traditional infrastructure and operations world.
Yep.
And I think this is one of the, and I noticed that you had chosen some things I'd said as one of the promotionals for this,
Yes.
and it's a very interesting question.
Yeah.
So let me tell you a story. In the middle of the pandemic, people started talking about the Great Resignation, and
Yep.
we were seeing this. There's
Yep.
no question. There was data, there were stories, and I started to hear a very interesting story. We would hear that developers would leave an organization, not necessarily for money,
Yep.
and on their way out the door, they would throw the infrastructure team, the INO organization, what in some contexts is called the IT team.
Yep.
Although in other contexts, IT includes the developers, so it's very muddled.
Yep.
They would throw the INO, what we prefer to call INO organization, under the bus. They're too slow, they're rigid. It takes 3 months to get a virtual machine, and we're in the cloud.
Yep.
It still
Yep.
takes 3 months,
Yep.
So we know it's not the supply chain. I mean, sure,
Yep.
when you're physically buying a server, there's going to be some latency there, but why does it take 3 months to get permissions to have a Amazon sandbox VM? And yet that's the kind of pain people put themselves into.
Yep.
And so developers would resign. They would communicate these things in exit interviews. Eventually, the director of HR notices a pattern. And the director of HR goes and has a conversation with the CIO. The CIO then has a difficult conversation with the director of infrastructure and operations that goes something like this. Look, digital transformation is not just hype. It's a thing.
Yep.
It is driven by people who are conversant in primary programming languages. These people are leaving us and pointing at you on the way out. Yep. Fix this, or I will find somebody who can.
Yeah.
And I'm not making this stuff up. We
Yep.
heard these cases,
Yep.
And it's absolutely a problem. And so the director of INO, in a panic, in more than one case, picks up a copy of Team Topologies. Or they listen to a podcast, or they read something maybe that Adrian Cockcroft says.
Sure.
There's a number of different avenues, and they're like, oh, well, clearly I have to get with the program, but how do I become agile? Because there's been a lot of false starts and a lot of confusion about how the traditional infrastructure world becomes agile.
Yep.
Which leads us to the current day and the current hypothesis that it's via platform teams and platform thinking that this will happen. Now, I'm going to offer you a definition. I'm going to kick it back to you. The thing that I would say in common, all the way from Simone through the Amazon retail example, through the ERP example, through where we're at right now, the one thing that I would hold in common is that platforms enable optionality at the price of some cognitive load, some investment in cognitive load. It's not like going to Amazon and searching for a book. A platform is never going to be that easy. You are to build something on the platform, and whether you need to be conversant in next generation distributed autonomous organizations and play in Simone's world, or you just want to set up a CI/CD pipeline and you've got a platform team who is offering you that service, you have to invest. It's going to cost you some of your gray matter to use the platform. That's the one thing that I see in common definitionally. So now I've kind of set the stage, and we can go in a couple different directions here.
So I think, like, one of the things that you said that I love, so like I'm giving a talk at the end of the month, and the talk is just like, I wanted the talk to be DevOps are the OG platform engineers, but DevOps are the original platform engineers. You had this moment where you were like, people are still struggling with understanding how to make infrastructure agile, right? Like that was the thing. So I think it's really interesting because I don't know if you know this, but like the original conversation that Patrick Dubois and Andrew Clay Schaefer have is Andrew Clay Schaefer saying to Patrick, we need to apply agile principles to infrastructure. That's that. And so like literally the narrative that from the very beginning for a lot of DevOps thinking is a platform narrative. It's,
absolutely.
And I do think it's interesting and challenging that so much of the conversation has been pulled away from the technical aspects of what DevOps is. It's better represented, I think, in like the SRE community. Like to me, like SREs are often basically operational architects. Like they get that a little bit better. But in so many teams, like, the DevOps initiative has basically been turn the operators into scripters or something like that. It's like not there yet. So I think that's a challenge. But the other thing that I was thinking when you were talking, because I like you had these different kind of views on the platform. So like one of the kind of very traditional definitions of platform is it's like a two-sided market. It's the enabler of a two-sided market, right?
Sure.
And, and so I think the interesting thing for me is when you kind of look at this from a couple different angles, which I think you did a good job of pointing out. So one is like clearly the two-sided market that you're involved in as a small company on Amazon is you would like to sell to customers that Amazon has gathered on a platform. That's like part of what it is, right?
Yep.
Like they have the customers, you would like the customers, you're there because of the customers. Classic like two-sided market argument, right? And then I think a lot of people look at internal developer platforms and they say, what's the two-sidedness of it? Like, where's the two sides?
Yeah.
And then they kind of do, oh, it must be the developers and the operators are the two sides of the market. And the platform is like a way of like negotiating between them, right? Which I don't think either of these two are wrong. But I like to think that the way to help people unconfuse themselves about this a little bit is to argue it's actually a three-sided market in both cases, because as you pointed out, as a business, I don't just want the customers. I want certain services to service the customer. I want logistics. I want storage. I want shipping. All these things, right? So that's actually like there's another market involved there. The business is involved with services that Amazon is providing. And in the same way, I think if you look at an internal development platform, it's three-sided because it's not one development team negotiating with the platform team. It's actually using the platform to negotiate common need across multiple development teams, right? So it's actually in the same way. There's a market of development teams that are trying to work together in a way, and they're asking for services to be developed on the platform. Because I think the important part about that, to me, it ends up being in a lot of the conversation, we get this this very developer-centric, developer experience conversation. So it's like, I usually kind of point out that it's like the conversation is very much based right now from the developer's point of view, looking at the platform, right? And like Nicole just published a paper about DevX and the importance of DevX and all this stuff, right?
Great stuff.
Good stuff. Same thing, cognitive load questions, cognitive engineering questions, same type of conversations happening in the resilience engineering community. But I think that the part that I think is missing in the conversation is the operators looking up from the platform and going, there's not just one team, there's a bunch of teams. How am I negotiating with them? So I think that is one of the parts of the conversation that I think ends up being a little confused. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, so first of all, I mean, full credit where due to Andrew and the initial call for Agile infrastructure. I think we definitely familiar with that history. And so much goodness came out of it. I mean, the whole infrastructure as code and automation and where we are is we're in an historic process, Jabe. And I know you think in these terms as well. I mean, this stuff only really took off in 2008. This is blink of an eye stuff. We're talking about. I mentioned the size of the ERP market. I saw other numbers. All in, IT as an economic sector globally. 3 trillion. I think it was 3 trillion or something. I mean, it's a huge part. Corporate, just B2B IT. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars, billions and billions. This stuff does not change easily. You're talking about embedded practices and feedback loops and cycles, persistent cycles of self-reinforcing feedback loops, and massive quantities of assets. And we've always done it this way. And what's the business case for change? It's just taking time. But what has happened, I want to home in on this problem of how does it appear to the operator. So let's look at it from that perspective of the operator. Now, first of all, as much as many developers I know would just love to see the sysadmins and the operators and the DBAs just kind of fade away, it's not gonna happen anytime soon, right? And organizations who are looking at transformation and taking transformation very seriously. I mean, sure, there's this whole conversation about fake agile and these
Yep.
pointy-haired bosses, and they don't
Yep.
care, and they just want to, just slap a few. I mean, the cynicism is rife,
Yep.
right?
Totally.
I don't get that cynicism. I talk to thoughtful, intelligent,
100%.
hardworking executives every day who are trying to
Absolutely.
make sense of this stuff. They are not pointy-haired bosses. They are dealing with this massive economic and operational inertia.
Yep.
You just don't turn an ocean liner on a dime,
I think that's right. Yep.
And so they are not going to start. First of all, they are not going to start by firing all of their infrastructure people and then hiring all new agile people to come in and run infrastructure.
Yep.
From where?
Yeah.
Where are you going to find the people?
Right.
So you're going to start with the people you have.
Absolutely.
Period.
Yep.
There's no other option.
Yep.
And then the people you have, you're going to start saying things like, well, can you be more agile? Well, what does that mean to an infrastructure person? I know, for example, people will say, well, we'll bring in some scrum masters and we'll make the DBAs do a stand-up every day.
Yeah.
Now that is fake agile.
Absolutely.
That is cargo cult agile. That's, and people have tried that, and then it just breeds resentment.
Yep.
The part of the agile and DevOps message that is useful and was a core part of the DORA research. DORA research I tend to summarize along 3 lines: automation, culture, well-known. Those get a lot of airplay. And then the third one was product team principles in general. Product-centric. Product-centric operating model. And that's for a long time. So in the more sophisticated, forward-thinking organizations, the question becomes, how do we bring product centricity to the infrastructure group?
Yep.
Not a bad solution. Oh, by the way, on the way to getting there, there were some dead ends.
Yep.
Full stack engineer, and I'll even pick on full stack team. I think that's a dead end too.
Yep.
At scale, it's a dead end.
Yep.
There's just too much cognitive load. There's too much complexity.
Yep.
And so if we can't afford to put a DBA on every product team, we can't afford to put a network engineer on every product team. There's going to be specialization. Don Reinertsen and I talked about this in a blog that got a lot of readership a couple years back.
That's right. Yep.
The problem is the operational model for managing the specialists.
Yep.
And there are a number of aspects to that. First of all, what pisses people off? Excuse the French. It's not that the DBAs or the network engineers or the Kubernetes cluster operators are specialized and have deep knowledge. That's not what makes people angry.
Yep.
What makes people angry, frustrates developers, is human in the loop delay.
Yep. Absolutely.
It's nothing more complicated than that.
Yep.
So a queue being serviced by a human in general is a risk factor. You need to look at that.
Yep.
Most people don't think about it that clinically. They don't think about it that analytically. They're just they build up these big abstractions about how the INO group is unresponsive, and then you're fighting these religious battles. No, we're not, and it's not helpful. Where do you have your queues? Show me where your queues are, and we'll start to have a more practical conversation.
Absolutely.
But beyond just the queuing, and all credit in the world to Don, everybody should read Don Reinertsen. Beyond that, though, the question is who is it that is going to start thinking about this queuing problem? It's whoever owns the service design, the service delivery for whatever organization it is that's having this queuing problem.
Yep.
ITIL had some good ideas. ITIL was actually moving in this direction. I mean, ITIL winds up as a punchline. It breaks my heart a little bit because there were good intentions there. They got a couple key things wrong.
Yep.
But the idea that services are measured by the success of the outcome, and that to some extent we're trying to shield the consumer of the service from all of the sausage making, that's a good idea.
Yep.
Now that conversation is morphing into the product conversation, and it's the product owner, it's the product mentality that starts to sit back and look, okay, previously my service design was that I took tickets, or my team took tickets from ServiceNow. Work orders came in, change requests came in. I took them. They always were lacking in context, so I had to have conversations.
Yep.
And we wound up with a big backlog because people didn't realize that a backlog was causing economic damage in
Yep.
Don's terms. It was like,
Yep.
they'll get it when they get it. And, this is the state of the art in the industry. So now we're in this situation where we're seeing at the leading edges, people realizing, no, a service owner is a product owner. They
Yeah.
need to delight their customers.
Yeah.
So you start opening up the conversation around, well, internal customers. And then you're a hop, skip, and a jump away from Simone's world. I don't know
Yeah.
that we're ready to go there that in this conversation, but
Yeah.
oh, by the way, business within a business is becoming a thing.
Yeah.
Minimally, though, the organizations that are successful in transformation are bringing in product team thinking and product ownership of some kind. They're
Yeah.
bringing that thought process, but it's not easy.
Yeah.
It's very difficult, and I can go into some of the difficulties there, but I've probably talked enough on for.
Yeah, I love to hear about the difficulties. One of the things there's two things I was thinking. I think we agree on most of that. One of the things I would say is like, I talk to executives all the time, and one of the things I say to them is like, did you get the ROI on your Agile investment? Like, did you get the ROI in your DevOps investment? And 99% of the time they say, I don't really think so. I don't think I got what I expected out of it. And then I'll ask them, like, when you started the Agile thing, was it like entirely basically a process and social system that you were trying to improve? Like, were you improving the way of working in the organization? I'll say, yeah, I think so. Like, stand up, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. And then I'll say, like, did you change your architecture in any way? And they're like, I'm not really sure. And I'll say, like, so let's just get this straight. You built an architecture and a bunch of processes for maintaining an architecture based on a highly functionalized system. You had DBAs, you had whatever infrastructure people, and often you set up processes so that other teams could not change those things if they weren't on that functional team.
Right.
And now you have decided that you want to be Agile and everybody's on the same team. You haven't changed the architecture. You haven't changed the policies. You're still using crazy ServiceNow thing that you set up without trying to kind of refactor that in any way. Why don't you think it's working? Like, maybe it's because people can't get anything done because you set it up so that people can't get anything done on purpose. You did that on purpose and you haven't fixed it.
Yeah, no, the whole idea, for example, when the human in the loop, when you start to see a functional silo, I mean, and what is, and we've been actually having a debate about, is silo even a useful term, and what we mean by a silo. But to me, I'll just digress because I know you'll probe this. Silos are highly functional in actual food products and farming. They have a well-defined API. They don't cause an unreasonable cost of delay. It's very clear to what to expect if you're pulling up to a silo and selling it grain or buying grain from it. The mechanics of it are well defined. The problem is when you've got high cognitive load or high context kinds of work, and you're trying to ship context via artifacts, i.e. an intake request, because the team doing the work is going to start with a 30-page question, and in 2 years that will be a 200-page questionnaire.
100%. Absolutely.
And they have pushed as much cognitive load out of their world upstream onto the requester.
Absolutely.
And because they're also not tracking anything like sentiment analysis, they're not incented on the sentiments and the reactions of those who are their customers. Well, they're not really treating them like customers. Then you're up against this broken model, and nobody's incented to fix it.
Absolutely.
There isn't the attentiveness. ServiceNow is not the problem. I mean, we need work. We need work tracking. It's the problem is the Taylorist model of machine shop. Basically, all this stuff was based on machine shop operations. The idea that you would have requirements, a group of business analysts doing requirements, and then you'd have coders and testers operations. It's like it's cutting, stamping, grinding, assembling, finishing. It's straight out of a factory. It was the exact analog.
Yep.
It's taken us a long time to realize that doesn't work. But how then do you break it? Well, automation helps. But this is also where we run up into the the problems of large enterprises. The examples people love to point to, the Netflixes, the Facebooks, also are highly disciplined architecturally. And that's one thing. I mean, you will hear people say, well, Silicon Valley is Agile and the great Silicon Valley properties don't use ITIL and da 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 da. And I'm like, yeah, yeah, but I don't think that if you were at Netflix, you had an option to go swipe a credit card and go use Azure just because you felt like it.
Yep.
And I talked to way too many people in, more traditional enterprises where they're struggling with that kind of legacy.
Absolutely.
They're not struggling with overbearing ivory tower architecture. They're struggling with a lack of architecture. That dates back pre-product model. That was a problem in the project world, and it's still a problem in the product world.
Absolutely.
So the path forward, and folks like Donnie Burkholz has talked about this, and I just was at the Minnesota the Minnesota Tech Association did a local event, and Annie Domeyer from SPS Commerce was there. It's the paved road strategy.
Yep.
You've got to start building architectures that people want to use and that they perceive as the path of least resistance.
Absolutely.
And then you start to get the flywheel effect happening on those defined platforms. You stop chasing after people telling them no. You just start making the point of, why are you doing this experimental research and development work when we've already got a platform that handles
Absolutely.
deployment and compute and persistence and networking and segmentation and everything you need? It's all there. And
Right.
by the way, you can self-service it, and it doesn't require endless painful conversations with an engineer who's clearly suspicious that you don't know what you're doing.
Yep.
Having been on both sides of those conversations.
So yeah, I mean, I love that story. Like the way I combine the two stories you just told about the road and some of the inflation of form filling, right, is what I think most modern IT organizations do is that they look at a road that's unpaved,
Mm-hmm.
and they get a bigger truck, and then they put bigger shocks on the truck and bigger tires on the truck, and they keep on modifying the truck.
That's a great analogy.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And in this analogy, obviously, the trucks are either the teams or the projects, right? Like instead of fixing the thing, and of course, the bigger trucks or the bigger tires tear up the road more. So it's like getting worse, not better. And so, like the idea is, want to go. Would you like to drive a sports car? Everybody wants high flow. That's a sports car metaphor, not a monster truck metaphor. Maybe instead of investing all of your time in like hardening projects, you should invest some time in, like, as we said, kind of architectural road mapping and making the right thing easy, as opposed to forcing compliance-based platforming. Seems like a not very effective version of this.
I couldn't say it better. And just to continue on with the metaphor, the challenge for the modern enterprise architect is to stop running after the big trucks and writing them tickets for their mufflers being too loud, and focus on a freeway that is flowing so fast that people aren't going to want to drive those big vehicles. They see no value to it. They're tired of getting 6 miles per gallon, which is what the equivalent of what you get when you've got that kind of bespoke, as the Brits would call it, infrastructure. And then, you can start to drive lighter weight sports cars on that well-architected platform. And that's what I tell my architect clients. I say, get out of the business of telling people no. Focus on the platforms that embed what you want to see architecturally. And by the way, to deploy to the platform, you're following all my architecture principles. I no longer have the checklist. You can't get through the checklist is in the continuous delivery pipeline, right? Which developers also don't mind, because the continuous delivery pipeline gives them immediate feedback. So it's just another variation on my code won't compile. And I just got to go fix it, and I can fix it on my time. And it's not a human being telling me no, it's the machine telling me no. Well, I've been used to the machine telling me no ever since I tried and failed to compile my first C program, right? So they just slot it into that process. They get into the flow and they're fine.
how do I get this turtle move around the screen again? Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. I'm failing the SBOM check. Well, that wasn't there last time. It's a new version of the pipeline. Okay, I got to figure out how to comply. I figure out the SBOM check. And as long as they don't have to go enter somebody's arbitrary queue with a human in the loop on the other end, they're going to be cool.
Yeah. So I want to get back. I do want to get back to product and platform
And difficulties. We should
and
talk about the
difficulties.
difficulties. Yeah.
But the other thing I wanted to talk about really quickly is the way that I've been thinking about a certain kind of platform or a certain like set of platform theory is to say that I think so. We've talked about kind of like the golden paths, paved road,
Right.
highly highly opinionated platform, like pre-configured, like lowering cognitive load
Right.
theory of platform, right? Yeah.
Yep.
And so I think there's another one which you gestured at when you're talking about team topologies, which you referred to like. So I think the terms you were using are large grain and small grain, which I like is also like great. I love the granularity conversation. How big are the components? All that kind of stuff is very interesting. So so then the language that I want to use there is that it's a composable platform. It's something that like the team can compose, right?
Thank you. Yes, absolutely.
And then the last one I think is the one that I think more and more people are going to end up with, which is a decomposable platform, by which I mean there's an opinionated structure that you can take apart. So you don't have to like figure out how to put all the parts together. You can just like replace the logging system or whatever you particularly want.
Exactly.
And I think that kind of points towards this other argument that I tend to have, which is I understand the theory behind cognitive load and what we're trying to achieve there. Herbert Simon's componentization theory in organizations and IT infrastructure is like all that for since the 80s, right?
Yep.
But I think the term cognitive load tends to confuse people in that they look at it and immediately think all load must be bad. All cognitive load must be bad.
No, it's saying all mass is bad.
Exactly right. Yeah. So I tend to think that people try to think of it as like, oh, the design and again, this is also from HCI, the initial places where the cognitive load discussion comes from, ergonomics and stuff like that, where they would measure cognitive load and they would say, this interface is better than that interface because this interface has lower cognitive load than that interface, right? And I think, this can clearly be seen as not necessarily the right answer because like nobody wants to do click ops. Nobody wants to install every thing on their like servers by, having GUIs to click.
Yeah, that was a dead end, clearly.
So there's clearly an extreme on one end that doesn't necessarily work. And there's clearly another extreme, which is like, nobody would want to set up servers from assembly or some nonsense like that. So, but the point I'm trying to make is that I think it's like a design decision. Like there's a spectrum here. And what we should be thinking about is what do we want the developers to focus on? Cognitive load is just thinking about something, right? So what do we want them to think about? And what do we want them to not really pay attention to right now? And that to me is better captured in like the resilience engineering language of cognitive engineering theory, right? Like you need to engineer the system to kind of design the cognitive load, the cognitive placement. Anyway, it's a nitpick, but.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree, and I'm almost certainly using cognitive load more loosely than I should.
Yeah.
It's I don't use the word all that particularly carefully.
Yep.
But I guess the question is where is the space where you want to afford degrees of freedom for creativity?
Yep.
And you have to make that is part of the design decision in the space is figuring out, well, where are the degrees of freedom and where are we opinionated?
Yep.
That's absolutely I think a big part of it.
Yeah, I mean, so like one of the kind of examples like David Snowden would throw around these same ideas is like the difference between safety of a stoplight and safety of a traffic circle. And most people would think traffic circles are more dangerous, but in fact,
They're
traffic
not
circles are radically
much
more
safer.
safe.
Yeah, I've
And
read that research. Yeah.
it is a cognitive load question, right? It actually increases your cognitive load significantly to enter a traffic circle. You have to pay a lot more attention. You got to watch the other agents. You got to be thinking about what's happening. And one of the arguments why stop lights are not safe is because they have lowered cognitive load to the point where people go light green, I go, and then they get T-boned.
Right.
Right? Like, just happens all the time. Anyway, so let's do a little bit more about product.
Yes.
And one of the things like I feel like you and I have some agreement that I would be a little bit more subtle about, which is around this idea of maybe there's a difference between a product and a service, maybe. And one of the ways I would tend to say that is that I think that service design is pretty confused in the nomenclature too, because I can think of easily 3 different service designs. So you pointed out ITIL service design, and that's, as you pointed out, primarily a conversation about risk mitigation, like who's going to own the implications of the SLA that gets made, right? Like you should be able to expect that your cell phone works. And if it doesn't work, then it's the service provider's fault. They got to figure it out. It's not your fault, right? And there's some interesting things to say about that. And then there's obviously like SOA and microservice, like service design is an IT architecture.
There's that side of it.
Granularity, componentization, abstraction, interface design, all that kind of stuff, right? And then the last one is this is where I come from like CMU is where these this kind of language started, which is kind of designerly service design. So like the design of a service, often heavily emphasizing the idea that value is co-created in a service. It's not given to someone. So it's not so like in that language, a product is given to you fully developed. You just like you can choose to use the product or not, but you're not co-creating the value. You're not like putting some of the product together, right? I mean, we could have some interesting conversations about like, is a sandwich service designed, but let's leave that to the side. But I think like if you look at something like you look at something like Starbucks, right? You will see that it's service design. There's a expectation that you have a certain performance that you're gonna do with the barista, and there's other products in the room that you can configure to have a particular kind of experience you want. But if you go in there and order coffee like you order coffee at a gas station, like you're not having the Starbucks experience, whether you think that's good or not. But so I wonder about like I want to talk about like what are the difficulties you see with kind of product management, and one of the things that I'll just throw out there immediately is I think product management itself is most people don't understand that alone very well. But secondarily, like are there differences between are there useful differentiations between service, platform, product? And I would also like immediately concede that I think that people treating platforms like products is almost certainly advanced. The question is it, are we painting ourselves into a corner?
These are difficult semantics. At one point, I was in some early conversations with the object management group who did the UML meta models, and the listserv there would just go on for ages. But one thing I remember was somebody pointing out that there were upper ontologies and lower ontologies, and the upper ontologies were the realms where things tended to get religious. So I have a functional ontology that works for me and is what I generally encourage, and where possible I establish if I have influence in a certain domain. There is at least one other major ontology, but the ontology I prefer is that products are the base class. Products subtype into goods and services. Now other people will say products and services are mutually exclusive. And in that case, you know that they are equating products with goods.
Yep. Yep.
My counterexample to that is my years with AT&T,
Mhm.
who, when you ask them, when we would talk internally about things like broadband or wireline or wireless, the term was product. It was
Yeah.
not service.
Yeah.
And yet, when you look at the academic definitions of service, leave ITIL out of it. The academic definitions of service started with something called IHIP, intangible, heterogeneous, inseparable, and perishable. And I won't
Mhm.
go into all of those. I think you know that. And then
Mhm.
more recently, all of those were falsified, and the leading lights in service theory prefer something along the lines of a performance. So I appreciate the performance
Yep.
thing you said, a performance or an act for the benefit of another.
Yep.
And
Yep.
then I'm sure people are busy falsifying that, because that's what the academics do, is they constantly poke holes in each
Got to
other.
get published somehow.
There's also this thing called service dominant logic, which I think you probably have had some passing
Yep.
familiarity with. So we researched all that stuff when we were trying to sort through these things, and I was very tactical in why I was doing this. I wanted to figure out why we were just going around in circles on these discussions, and I
Yeah.
came up with a set of concepts that work for me. And
Yeah.
that the idea is that, products subtype into goods and services. For the most part, in IT, we're dealing with services. We're not dealing with goods unless we're actually talking about a cell phone or something. For the most part, computation is a service, because the computer performs for you on demand and then produces something like pixels painted in an image of Jabe Bloom.
Yep.
That's the service I'm receiving from this computation infrastructure that we're leveraging right now. It's a service. You can't put it in a jar and put it on the shelf and then open it up tomorrow.
Yep.
The computation doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Within the services, so the products are always going to be services in the context we're talking about. That just becomes a given.
Yep.
And I don't belabor it. And then we have feature team level services, or feature teams, and then we have platform teams. The feature teams are business and customer aligned and facing. They tend to be cross-functional. And then we have the platform services, which at this juncture are growing out of specialized teams that are being stretched to behave in new ways. And that's the real difficulty.
Yep.
Because the thing we're missing right now is, where do we find the leadership? Where do we find the platform product managers to run these platform teams?
Yep.
We're solving the upper problem fairly well. Scrum has been hard at work solving that upper problem for 20 years.
Yep.
But applying it to that legendary team of DBAs, I love picking on the DBAs. It's like, what are you going to do? You're going to parachute somebody in. Hi, I'm your new product owner to be the product manager of your DBA team. By the way, I don't know anything about databases.
Yeah.
How long is that person going to survive? And
Yeah.
yet these are the kinds of experiments that are going on. You got to build somebody from within. You can't hire them in the market, but you have to stretch them to start thinking in terms of outcomes, results, internal customer, start realizing that if you've got a big backlog, this doesn't mean that you're guaranteed a job. It means that you have a brewing crisis and value being destroyed. And just really, the org change management is immense, and there's so much. I guess the thing I'd close with is just, there's so much experimentation going on right now, and it's underreported.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the IT press.
Yeah.
But the transformation in the IT operating models is massive. We are talking about the biggest financial services and telcos and energy companies are doing this.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah, I mean, that's my experience too, is that people are trying to get the capabilities right. They're trying to figure out how those capabilities should be managed, and how to reward people appropriately for those things. I mean, it is a significant change in the way that people are thinking through these things. The way that you kind of identified products as services reminds me of this other thing, because initially I wanted to object, because I wanted to say things like, networks, routers, computers, all these other things are goods that need to be managed. And
as physical entities, artifacts are definitely goods. No argument there.
So, but
atoms, all that stuff.
But one of the things that we've been talking about at Ergonomic a lot recently is in an attempt to unconfuse people. Is we've been talking about the NIST layer cake. So you've got like product or application, you've got platform, and you've got infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
And it's like a 3-layer cake. Sometimes I think people get confused with like traditional 3-layer architectures. Like there's like, whatever, interface, business logic, and backend. That's not really the same thing.
No, they don't map well.
But one of the things we've been trying to say to people is at all those things are software, or at least what we want is for them to all be software. That's what infrastructure as code means, for instance, is that we want to treat the infrastructure as if it were software. And as we develop platforms, we want you to treat that as software. And as you develop your application, obviously those things are software. But it's weird. We only have developers and operators in people's minds at the top level, at the application or feature team level. We need to, and I know that like people are starting to develop like platform teams and stuff like this, but we're the platform operators, right? Like there is supposed to be a developer and an operator at every level. And each of these are separate value streams that have different customers.
Yes, they do.
Why aren't we organizing systems this way? And then how is it that we should maybe organize across these layers? In other words, infrastructure team should have significant conversations with the platform team about like what new infrastructure is being put in place, what's being decommissioned, blah. Platform team should say we need these new features, these new capabilities to the infrastructure team. Like there's a set of conversations that happen horizontally, and then there's these value streams that have to be established.
Yeah.
And I like there's very few places outside of like I think maybe some of the FANG, right, had kind of naturally emerged these structures. But when people are doing it intentionally, I don't, because I think what like the current view of like a value stream would be something like we have a feature team and it flows work into a platform team and it flows into a new infrastructure team and then like over into production.
Yeah, and I don't know that that's not. I think that what happens is that you have to then contend with the problem of you build it, you run it.
That's right.
Thank you, Werner Vogels.
Yep.
I tend to view the platform team as a horizontal. And then I view the feature team as a horizontal. And at the very end of the feature team, you have the problem of support. Because what does it mean to actually operate? Let's unpack this operator. It's like you got the developer and the operator. Well, we know what the developer does. That's well understood. What does the operator do? Well, in the traditional model, the operator installs in production. Not necessarily in lower environments. And then once you've installed it, what more is there to do? The software is there. It's presumably running. Well, you maybe have to install further updates, but you also need to monitor. And then out of the monitoring comes a very well specified and well understood set of protocols that themselves have been moving slightly. You need you wind up with some kind of tiering, and you can have a classic 3-tier model. You can bring in SRE concepts. You can bring in the concept of swarming, which is another operational model. But at the end of the day, the one thing you don't want to do, and they're the guys, if you build it, you run it, you don't want certain levels of problem to get routed immediately back to those developers in the product team. That's just that makes no sense at all. And I know people who experimented with that. I think the experiments have stopped, but I was aware of a few experiments about 5 years ago. And people tried to do away with the service desk and do away with the network operations center. And it's just going to all go to the product team because that's what Silicon Valley does, right? And this is how we're going to do it. It's the new way. It was a catastrophe. Absolutely. I mean, the stories I heard were gruesome. And the ITIL professionals, if they'd heard those stories, would have just been laughing up a storm because what was it? It was just a bunch of finger pointing. Absolutely. Hey, it works right on my monitor. It works right on my inconsistent information, no concept of the service, no concept of the customer, just a bunch of finger pointing.
Yep.
And so people very quickly realized that they still needed some consolidated support capabilities. If you have a monitoring platform, somebody's got to be attentive. Sure, eyes on glass, and there's problems with you can't have people staring at screens, and the Navy figured that out 40 years ago, and all of the operational stuff. But these are also important aspects of the platform. A well-managed platform has a monitoring capability. It has a knowledge management capability. It can bring humans into the loop at different levels of seniority and understanding as appropriate for the problem domain. These things don't change. This is what we mean by the operator, is those capabilities. Now, is it the platform, is the end state, is it flowing into the platform? Is it like an L shape, or is it just that, the service, we consider the feature team as a service, and it's still getting these services under it? I mean, we're drawing abstract pictures, and, the reality is, the abstract picture is simply a finger pointing at the moon. It's not the moon. So, but that's how I tend to view it, is really it's the horizontal end to end. And there is a build run imperative, at least at the level of tier 3. And we start to see somewhat more tier 3. We want the product team kept accountable for the decisions they make. We don't want a world where product teams project teams can just scatter to the winds when they're done, and then people with no context are then called on to run the stuff. That was a bad idea. We also don't want maintenance programmers. That was a bad idea. I talked to all kinds of companies of all different sizes. Very few people will admit to having maintenance programmers anymore. But to me, that was the thing that went away when people said, well, we should have a you build it, you run it model, is we got rid of the maintenance programmers who weren't there when the code was created and architected and designed. Anyways, I could go on. I feel like I'm ranting and raving like a madman here. So
it's all good. It's great. I mean, so again, I think we try to point this out too. A bit like the Vogel's quote is so radically misunderstood.
It is
by so many people.
It is.
There's two versions, I think, that confuse people. One version is you build it, you run it as if you run the whole stack. And that's literally just nonsense, right?
It's not going to work.
It's never going to work. And it's not what Vogel was saying. But there was a platform at Amazon when he made that declaration. He didn't expect you to run those things. He did expect you to be responsible for the functions and the outcomes of your functions.
Yes.
And you did need to be able to operate and monitor things like that. The kind of stupid example I always use is like at Zappos, they have a sign that tells you how many shoes have been sold within the last 10 minutes. And everybody can see that. That's, what we might call an SLO. It's got an objective and an outcome. People are trying to figure out how it works. All that kind of stuff.
I think the reason, just to inject a little bit, I think the reason that quote got so much attention and the context, I have no idea what was in his head, but this was at a time when project management was still the default operating model. When we would bring together the team of, the leading engineers would be assembled in projects. They would write the code, and they would throw it over the wall to not just operations, but then a separate application maintenance group. And this is where you got into long-lived maintenance branches versus the long-lived, trunk. And you got we got the main developers are working on major version 1 to major version 2. In the meantime, the maintenance programmers have a long-lived branch where they're fixing all the bugs. And so version 2 comes in without all the bug fixes that the maintenance programmers put in. And then you got the big bang. And oh my God, those days were horrible. And I think we started really decisively seeing people moving away from those. And this starts to get to be real inside baseball, Jabe. A lot of folks weren't exposed to these kinds of problems. And then so they hear something like you build it, you run it, and they come to wrong assumptions. They don't understand the context and the nuances of the context at the time. And I'll admit, I'm speculating to a degree, but that speculation is based on the fact I was in big enterprises seeing all these dysfunctions at the time. So
I think that's right. I mean, I think all that stuff, sometimes I call it double loop merge parties, right? Like you look at somebody and you go, so let me get this straight. You deploy, you're trying to deploy something and you have like a 2-week hardening sprint or whatever you want to call it, where you're trying to like make sure that the thing works because you didn't merge for 3 sprints and now you're going to merge and all sorts of things are coming up. But once the developers have merged, give them permission to go off and start building the next version. Well, QA is tested because you can't have the developers just sit still.
Exactly.
Then there's like another thread over here, people trying to fix defects like you're describing, and these people are over here making more defects, and then you have to merge to merge.
Oh God, yes, you nailed it. You nailed it. Oh my God, and that is what we needed to get rid of. And really, if I was simplifying it for a senior leader, I'm like, okay, you have a 3-tier model. We're going to take tier 2 and we're going to split it. The higher parts of tier 2 are going to go to this product team, and you're not going to disband this product team. They're going to keep working a queue that, shout out to Mick Kirsten, is composed of, features and debts and risks. And what was the fourth one? Features, debts, risks, and I can't remember the 4, but the 4 from the Flow framework. And then the lower part of tier 2 is going to go to a more empowered tier 1, because tier 1 is shedding some load because of chatbots and AI ops and legitimate and real applications of automation that are taking place at that level. And so the whole thing kind of refactors, but what's left, one of the outcomes is definitely single branch, single trunk, one team understands the code base. And I know there's exceptions, but I still think it's generally the default we want to push towards.
Yeah, I think that's right. So like the other thing that I think about when I think about this is, again, this is like advanced ideas that I think people will run into. So I know some people have run into them already, but not everybody is doing there yet. So most value streams in my mind end up, or flow streams, people have different kind of names for this idea of how work flows in the system, tend to adopt theory from Lean and from theory constraints. And if you look at it, there's a subset that is called product theory, and so what they're doing is they're creating what are called product lines in Lean and theory constraints, right? And I think that's fine. But when we look at a platform, what we're actually making in a platform, I think, is a product family, not a product line. So there's product lines on top that consume the product family of features, but it ends up looking more like a Y line than a bunch of separate lines into production, right? Like there's like merge points where many teams are kind of using the same thing. So like to make it really simple, right? I don't know if this is still true, but for a long time, if you bought a Honda station wagon or a Honda minivan or an Accord, all the same infrastructure underneath, same engines, same chassis, everything. The only thing that was happening was the features were changing. The thing that you interacted with kind of drop off of this infrastructural components. So I think like people are going to have to start grappling with stopping. I mean, you said it earlier a little bit. Like we can't have a DBA on every team. We can't have a full operations team for every single team in enterprise. There has to be some sort of gearing down where you get this kind of product family system running. And again, I think that's it requires a different form of management in my mind, right? Like so a product you're trying to like service in general, you're trying to service like a market niche. Like you're not really negotiating in between individual customers frequently. Although if you're doing B2B, maybe you are.
Yeah.
But internal platforms requires significant negotiation between development teams, and the platform team needs to understand how to do that, right? Like they have to understand how to kind of create that.
That's absolutely key. And I use a diagram. I'll just kind of try to visualize for you. In the center of the diagram is a triangle that represents the default, I'll use the word service model for want of a better word, the default service model of ticketing.
Yep.
Basically simple queues, simple assumption of simple workflow. And then to the right, we have automation. And to the left, we have higher touch. And if you look at this in terms of business within a business, basically you're trying to expand a functional manager's perspective into the full range of responsibilities that a business leader has. And in fact, JP Morgan Chase, for example, recently publicly announced they were naming 25 of their IT general managers as mini CEOs. The whole mini CEO conversation. I know that's another controversial one, and I'm not the best person to even talk about that, but it is a fact that statement was made in April of last year. So the mini CEO, well, if you are a mini CEO, what are you responsible for? Product conception, research and development, design, actual production and operations, marketing, customer sentiment, publicity, advertising, sales, closing deals, service, all of that. That's what a business does. It does all those things, loosely speaking, right? And the challenge then is really expanding people out. So if let's say that and I'm going to stop using the DBA example because I can already hear people say DBAs are obsolete and it's all going to be self-healing and self-optimizing anyway. So let's say a cloud architect. Let's say that I have a platform team, a cloud platform team that is helping standardize, reduce variation, get to a more paved road. How does that team actually then interact with its developer customers? Well, you can set up a guild. You should set up a guild. If you can do it in person, even better. Pizza and beer, first Tuesday of the month. Come at 3:30 and hear the latest from the cloud platform team on what's going on. And oh, by the way, we're also there to listen to you. Because this is what we do in sales and marketing, as we listen to the customer, and this is our equivalent for doing that. We also take sentiment analysis. We do a little net promoter score. Sure, people are over surveyed. I'm not going to over index on that, but people do it, and the thing is if you have no sense of your customer sentiment, then you're back to just being a functional manager and just taking tickets. So I think that becomes really the critical, that customer obsession. And that's something Forrester has pioneered. The term customer obsession, the customer obsessed operating model. That's Forrester. And one of the things that was clarified for me just the other day by one of the thought leaders there is that we never distinguished between internal and external customers. Our customer obsession research absolutely applies to customers wherever they're found, internally or in external relationships, market relationships, and in internal relationships. And I think that we keep coming back to that central concept, and I think it's solid.
So I guess like to me, one of the questions ends up being, what is the best way to service the organization? And so like you pointed out several times, the ticketing systems tend to be negative for lots of reasons. And one of the things I try to say to people,
forget people do cell phones, they're fine. There is a set of commodity work that it's fine. Go get a ticket. It's fine. Don't apologize. But
so I usually try to say to people like, there's a bunch of these. It's a positive feedback loop with a negative outcome. So the positive feedback loop is if you set up your platform team as a factory that is consuming tickets that are produced either through research or through other teams, asking them to develop X, Y, or Z. There's a positive feedback with a negative outcome, and that is that the more successful the platform becomes, the longer it will take for people to get their tickets serviced, because the tickets systems.
But wait. Okay, so this is where and I know we're probably at close to
Yeah,
time, but this is one of the critical nuances, Jabe. There's a dual axis value stream.
yeah,
The value stream has two axes. There is the axis of transactional flow, the actual retail transaction,
yeah,
the actual retail device, the high volume servicing of daily need.
yep,
And then there is the backlog of feature. And this is the distinction between, for example, the Toyota production system, which is
yeah,
in my mind, the vertical axis
yep,
of immediate transactional response, in
yep,
Toyota's case, provide automobiles,
yep,
versus the Toyota product management system, the
yep,
TPMS.
yep,
And these are orthogonal. I
yeah,
mean, I view them as orthogonal. Now, there's a blurry boundary. Sometimes in the services world, the request for what appears to be a routine transactional service morphs into something that is actually following the longer product life cycle, because guess what, you can't meet the service need without reconceiving your service design, which is why sales always is very attentive to, hey, we can't sell this into the market, we need something
mhm,
new. And so they're always banging on product management's door.
yep,
But it is two different life cycles, the
yeah,
transactional life cycle versus the backlog
yeah. I like
of
that distinction. Yeah,
updating. And Adrian Cockcroft definitely cautioned me over Twitter. He says the biggest problem I see with internal platform teams, it's not that on the transactional axis, sure, they can automate, it's that they get slowed down in being responsive when people need new services.
yep,
It's like, we need to do the qualis check in your CI/CD pipeline, we need to check SBOM
yep.
as routine thing, and then it takes them 6 months to get that kind of a thing done. And that's a problem I don't have a good answer for, other than you're gonna pick your poison and pay your price.
Yep. So the things I've been encouraging people to do, and I've seen it be successful a couple places, is push patches, not tickets.
Mm,
Basically, set up inner sourcing for your platform.
yeah.
So the one of the things I try to say to people sometimes is that platform code is just a different set of qualities on a particular function.
Yeah.
So for instance, like in most applications, you don't need multi-tenancy. You
Right.
might need multi-tenancy on a platform. So imagine that instead of asking the platform team to like develop some sort of multi-tenant version of your function, that you could push a patch of your function to the platform team. It's already been developed in a particular context. You kind of get that, you get rid of that. You're not going to need it. Yagani type, overdeveloped function type stuff. And then you just give it to the platform team. And then the platform team's responsibility is to upgrade it to the right level of quality. That's not to say that it was low quality in the context it came from. It's only low quality now in the platform context. So they can upgrade the quality so they can be whatever, multi-tenant, hooked into the monitoring system at the platform level, all that kind of stuff. I think it ends up creating a system in which the platform development team can better service teams, because the teams aren't trying to do the like describe it in a ticket,
Right.
back and forth, long delay.
No, you want automation as much as you can within. See, this is where there's just so much variation in the space, and the variation starts to bite us.
Yep.
We definitely want things as automated as possible. I
Yep.
mean, if let's I'll pick on the data example again, just because it's simple.
Yep.
Let's say that it used to always be a conversation with a DBA to even get I've got a shared Oracle database
Sure.
farm, and it used to be a conversation and a ticket to even get a small 25 gigabyte database for sandboxing purposes. Well, why can't I just have that with a budget number?
Yeah.
Just give me routine provisioning of base level access, base level resources with a qualified account.
Yep.
um, and this is the direction folks go in.
Yep.
And that's reasonable. But let's say that I have a large data centric property, and I have hit a scaling threshold,
Yeah.
or I need significant real time or resiliency.
Yep.
um, I've hit a scaling threshold. I need to move from SQL to NoSQL, or I need to develop a new sharding architecture. The data team, the data platform team, in some models is still able to accommodate me. I no longer am a self-service customer.
Yep.
I need consultation. I can
Yep.
also put in a request for consultation.
Yep.
Because this is a hard problem, and it's not something we're ever going to automate all that well. And applications don't hit scaling thresholds every day, and when they do, it requires careful thought.
Yep.
See CRE, SRE, right?
Absolutely. Or just see, like, sometimes I
Yeah.
point out to people, like, Amazon sells you services, right? Google sells you services. Azure sells you services. Will any of them sell you services without you talking to one of their architects so that they can help you understand how to properly implement the services? Like, basically all three of those people, if you ask them, will give you resources to help you understand how to consume the services better.
They want to see you succeed.
And this is
Yeah.
like, why aren't we doing this for internal platforms? Like, why wouldn't you expect that you basically need to build a little professional services group for the platform that does this type of stuff?
That has been the model in many cases. The trouble is that the professional service group would also take it upon themselves to gate the resource and not allow you
100%.
access, even if you knew perfectly well what you were doing.
Yep.
And then there would be latency and resource contention for the specialist. So the
Yep.
specialist is required to have the resource that you want. They have control over it. They might even develop a point of view that what you're doing doesn't merit the resource. I've seen
100%.
that anti-pattern.
Yep.
This is not I don't think this is a business priority. I don't care if your manager's sponsoring you.
Yep.
And then you're into some really nasty political stuff. At least on Amazon, yeah, you can go buy the rope with the credit card and hang yourself with it. And then when you decide you don't like the feeling of that, then they'll also talk to you about, well, don't tie the rope around your neck. It's basic architecture 101.
Yeah. So I'll leave you with this riddle, and then I have two more questions. But the riddle that you can come back and talk to me about at some point, because we've been kind of pointing at it the whole time. Yeah. Andrew and Sasha and I have this conversation pretty regularly, and we talk about databases. And so the question is a database an infrastructural component, a platform component, or an application component? And one of the things that I would tend to argue is that the answer is yes. And in particular, applications should own and transmit configuration and schema. Platforms should probably provide a way of self-service access to, the ability to install the schema and the data, and then disk licensing, all the other infrastructural concerns are probably an infrastructure thing. So that's my contention, is that it's very actually hard to pinpoint where a lot of services live. And that's part of the conversation I think we end up needing to have in order to get a better understanding what all this is about eventually. Go ahead.
So the data world, I know it well, know and love it. Spent a couple years as an information architect with Target, and I was at that point also a member of the Data Management Association, which is the professional community. Mm-hmm. You absolutely are right. The data conversation is really about persistence and state.
Yep.
And that exists at a high human cognitive level with concepts of ontology and meaning.
Yep.
And then translates all the way down through various levels of first proceduralization, routinization, definition, automation, and then various layers of automation, logical, physical, kind of the classic hierarchy, conceptual, logical, physical. And even within physical, you still have then many layers of abstraction before you're actually looking at the, encoded magnetic state of a bit on a solid state drive. These are that whole world is its own stack with many interfaces at the business process and capability level, the app level, the infrastructure level. It's a world.
I have this weird theory that basically argues that if we do this right, if applications should be primarily capable of configuring a platform, so again, transmitting a schema is an example of this, and we use SLOs to basically say, I expect this many transactions, this much data per transaction, this many users consuming the, like basically not describing the database, but describing the golden signals that are the database should expect. You'd end up in this weird position where eventually platform teams and infrastructure teams would get a schema request and a set of criteria and then determine what kind of database they should implement the schema on. Right?
Well, some of that would be defined by load too.
Yeah, totally.
I think load is one of the major determinants there. I mean, if the load is trivial, then a good old relational database is still an option
Absolutely.
a lot of people
100%.
are going to use, and I see no reason to not use it. But we know that there are certain scaling issues, and when you get into the whole CAP theorem space. So yeah, no, and then I think the other issue is interoperability.
Yep.
The autonomy, the desired autonomy of the product team. I mean, it comes right up against the wall when the fact is that the data is needed by a wide variety of stakeholders who need to be able to discover that data and access it and understand it and have it, under defined, controls and circumstances. So yeah, we never get away from these things.
I have so much stuff to talk about. Data stuff. You should come back. We have a whole talk about data. I once built this thing that we called the Agile data infrastructure for an organization with the theory that the primary constraint they had for Agile development was the way that they were accessing their data. And they had to build a system to have kind of
it was a huge issue for a lot of organizations.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what if people are going to take 3 ideas away or 3 things that you think are important for people to think about around kind of platform thinking? What do you have 3 ideas that people should take away?
The number one idea is understand how you're going to solve the problem of a platform or a technical product manager. That is the big challenge that organizations that are trying to go down this road are wrestling with. Beyond that, there is a general organizational change management question. So I'd say that second, people should be aware that product management is becoming the new kind of lingua franca. I am aware of a large European bank, for example, that reported to me they are sending 15,000 of their IT staff to 3 days of product management training. Just like people used to go to 3 days of Agile training 15 years ago. It's not going to create 15,000 product managers, but at least they're setting some expectations. They're creating a shared set of concepts. I think it's a fine thing. It's part of what you have to do in large scale org change management, is do that kind of thing. I know people get cynical about it. And then finally, I think the scale question, the scale and the composability questions are key. I don't have good answers. I don't think there are best practices. Is a batch scheduler platform team too fine-grained? Well, I don't know. Maybe a batch scheduler platform team makes perfect sense. If you've got a lot of batch and you've got significant investments there and the team can start to think of itself as a product team, I don't have any fundamental philosophical differences with that. But I will say you should think carefully, about even how you're defining value and where you're setting the bounds of autonomy. All of that and all these product conversations do then apply. And I would ask to mention one other thing, if I may.
Of course.
If there are any enterprise architect, especially managers on the phone, the Forrester Enterprise Architecture Awards, which are for the first time this year being delivered in partnership with the Open Group. This is the 14th annual International EA Awards. They're open in all regions of the world. And if people are interested in submitting their enterprise architecture cases to us for evaluation, maybe awarding of a prize at one of the Forrester forums, I'd be more than happy to hear from you. So.
Excellent. So, Charles, you'll send me a link. I'll put it in the description for people who want to be involved in that. That's great. The training that you were describing. So, I have fond memories of about 8 years ago. I had a Fortune 10 company have me train about 800 architects. And the primary conversations we were having were the difference between, being a gatekeeping, approving architect versus
Yep.
an actual designer. And it
Yep.
was a week of design theory, product theory, complexity theory, and
Been there.
it was awesome. And I loved doing it. And I think that had a significant impact on their architectural practice. So
Great.
I would hope that people would not just put their managers through, but also help their architects to have some of these conversations and make some of these decisions as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Cool. So I was going to ask you what we can do to support your work, but you already told us. Is there anything else that you'd like to mention?
No. I'm easy to find. Just folks can drop me a note. I'm pretty responsive on LinkedIn and Twitter. So
awesome. Thank you so much for coming. You should come back someday and we can rant some more. I had so much fun. It was really nice to see you again and talk to you.
Likewise, sir.
Awesome. Thank you.
Take care.
Yep.
All right. I was wondering if you were okay.
Thank